So we're going to get into the comment section.
This is a word. This is a world premiere. This is a word.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at a comment that I got to a video called I Got Called a Nigger plus Bite-Sized Vegan Drama-ish, where I talked about white supremacist, white nationalist rhetoric that we're hearing, just hearing from places like, the alt-right and, other movements that it seems were emboldened by Donald Trump, or at least that the media is interested in giving a platform to, because it's dramatic, right? Because it's sensational. And so in response to that video, I got a comment from someone who goes by the name Earthling Carl. So first of all, thank you, Earthling Carl, for engaging in this discussion. And so I'm going to read a little bit of what they said. So the first comment that I got from Earthling Carl was, "Hiya, new subscriber here. No hate at all, but when do you personally, I know you don't speak for all black people, LOL, think will be the time for black people, at least in modern Western society, to stop bringing up slavery? They have all the rights any white person does, unless I'm missing something. Across the rest of the world, absolutely, but you could arguably throw in millions of East Asians, South Americans, etc. They aren't all black or brown that experience terrible lives and virtual slavery. These injustices should be stopped, but I just don't see how they compare to modern societies." And so this exchange went on for quite some time, and I may jump down to look at some things that they said going on, but I just want to point out some of the things in this comment that raised some flags for me about whether or not this is somebody who was really interested in engaging in a dialogue, or someone who was simply being, a racist apologist or a white supremacist apologist. And what I mean by that, that's somebody who understands that there is a problem, but refuses to hear from people who are experiencing that problem and accept their rationale for why they think the problem exists, instead of saying, wow, yeah, there might be a link between what happened in the American past and what's happening right now. There are usually folks that say, well, the past is the past, leave it in the past, and basically don't talk about slavery. And so some things that I want to bring out, well, first of all, the person starts saying, no hate at all. And I think it's really, that's one of the first signs that I know we're going down a dangerous path. If the person has to tell me that that it's not going to be a hateful comment, there's probably something that they're, trying to pad a little bit by adding that language. And that said, I don't receive this with any hate, but I do, see that as a possible red flag. And then the person goes on to say, "I know you don't speak for all black people," which is actually something that I said in the video, but for them to reiterate that there, I think was nice, of them to remember that as they're asking me this question, that they, acknowledge that I don't speak for all black people. But the question is, why do I need to be speaking for black people in order to have an opinion about the reality that I see in this world? I'm not speaking for black people. I'm simply pointing out what I observe as happening in terms of race relations, in terms of all of the metrics, how people are doing in this country, and see that there's a disparity, and there's a disparity in this country. So for them to somehow categorize my opinion, or need to, clarify that I'm not speaking for all black people, I think that's kind of a given, and it might smack a little bit of a microaggression by saying, I don't expect you to speak for black people, but, and then they go on to say, and this is where it goes off the rails, when do you think will be the time for black people? So they're asking me, what I think is going to be the time for black people as a whole, at least in modern Western society. So they're saying, this is something so that they're anchoring their discussion in the present, at least in modern Western society. to stop bringing up slavery. So now their question, without maybe realizing it, is when will black people stop talking about slavery? They're not saying when will people in general stop talking about slavery. They're being very specific to say that it is black people, and they're interested in when black people will no longer be talking about slavery, which, has all kinds of other undercurrents and, likely meaning when will black people stop bringing up slavery, as an excuse, right? And, in later emails, the person verified that that is indeed what they meant. When will black people stop bringing up slavery as an excuse? And I guess my question is, when will we stop, blaming the English for the fact that we speak English in this country, right? It's like, when will we not tie our current reality to the past that brought us to that current reality, right? So, again, like the fact that we speak English, the fact that I'm speaking English right now is the result of something that happened in the past. It's the material effect of something that happened in the past, okay? And so then they ask the question, they make the statement, they have all the rights any white person does, unless I'm missing something. Again, they, meaning black people as a whole, have all of the rights that white people as a whole have. And let's, really be clear, because not every white person has the same rights in America, at least, right? We understand that. And there are still people who are fighting for rights in certain areas, right? So we know that not everybody has the same rights. And it wasn't until very, very recently that, for example, same-sex couples could be married and have it federally recognized, right? So we know that we don't live in a world where all things are equal under the law. But the problem here is that they seem to be basing an understanding of equality on what is in the Constitution, what the laws of the land. And if you read a newspaper about, laws, you understand that there are still laws on many books that actually continue to deny certain people rights, be they, rights to marry, rights to be out on the street at a certain time, right? And these are laws that are certainly archaic and unenforceable. But if you want to talk about it in terms of just the laws, an argument could be made that not everyone has the same rights, right? But aside from having rights, when we have discussions about the rights that people feel are their, inalienable rights, the rights that cannot be conferred on them, possibly we have those rights, but do we all enjoy the same rights? Do we all enjoy the same rights? So that's a question that I really would have for Earthling Carl, and ask him to really dive deep and do some exploration. And the way to do that is to, talk to a lot of people, watch a lot of films, read a lot of books, do a lot of research, and find out if indeed people are enjoying the rights that they have in the same way. And if they're not enjoying those rights, why are they not enjoying those rights? So, for example, and I almost am wary to use the police as an excuse, because then people get into a whole thing about the police are good. I think the police are fine, right? The police, I think the people who become police officers as a whole are fine. The way policing is done in certain communities is problematic at best, and dangerous at its worst, right? And so we see the police behaving in certain communities, and this is not just African American communities. These are poor communities all over the country. The poor are dealt with in ways that we would consider unconstitutional often. The poor have their rights run over often. And in this country, there is a correlation between poverty and access and race. Certainly most of the poor people in America are people who identify as white. Those communities are policed in the way that they are, often unfairly, in the same way that communities of color are policed unfairly, very often, and likely in very different ways. Likely in very different ways. And because of the way those communities are policed, people who live in those communities do not have the right to behave in the ways that people in other communities behave. So being out after a certain time in some communities is nothing, right? You're just kids being kids, what have you, right? But being out after a certain time in a community that's being, heavily policed could lead to you being mistaken for a suspect. And so people feeling that they have the right to do something. And so, we go on in this discussion. My first response to them was, I'm trying to get a sense of what it is that we're really talking about. When you say slavery, are you talking about the role Americans played in the transatlantic slave trade beginning in 1619 and ending in about 1865? Or are you interested in the development of the system of social control called white supremacy that was used to ensure European American working class conformity, complicity during the years slavery continued? So again, when people are saying, when are you going to stop talking about slavery? I think it's a little bit reductive because most of the time in my experience, it's not Black people talking about slavery. They're talking about institutions that began in slavery and continue today. Like, for example, the prison industrial complex, right? So that's something that I just want to suss out a little bit how something that seems like a very innocent comment can be fraught with problems. And if you think about that video, it was talking about me, having someone hurl a racial epithet at me and then talking about a very real and growing movement in this country called the alt-right. And that this person, instead of wanting to engage in a conversation about, what do we do in a society where you can be called a racial epithet, people feel entitled to do those things, and have that racial epithet tied to an institution where calling someone that name, you were, legally you had the right to do that. And not only would you be able to call them that name, then you could take them out and hang them to a tree, right? And so not wanting to dig down into the reality of what happened in that situation, but being more concerned with, the issue of a Black person bringing up slavery and wanting to know when Black people are going to stop talking about slavery. When are Black people going to stop being called niggers? When are white nationalists going to stop making comments like Europeans have never needed anyone else and the Europeans didn't need Black people for America to become what it became, right? So those are conversations that we could be having. But, I want to just say that a comment like this, and if you're making comments like this, please do understand that you might feel like you're, making these comments very innocently, but what really is happening is you're apologizing for something that we all agree is really here and really happening and really bad, right? You're apologizing for that, and you're also, when you're talking about, an African American talking about their experience with racism, you're apologizing for that, but you're also upholding white supremacy. You uphold white supremacy by trying to silence African Americans who want to speak out against it. So that's it for this video. Like it if you like it, share, comment, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourself. Peace.
And I love myself. The world is a ghetto with big guns and